Welcome to the Plagues Project.
And Plagues, Many Angles.
Now more than ever.
Come learn with us.
Contrary to our generally accepted understanding, the plagues are not a punishment. They're self-afflicted. And they represent and illustrate a link between human abuse, the enslavement of Israel, and environmental despoliation. This is a message for our time. It's about how empires get so caught up in their own power and their own control that they lose sight of the waning of their civilization and eventually self-destruct. Every empire in history has gone down with all of their power and all of their might. And we have to take that seriously, not just in terms of our own government, but in terms of our world today, because we are privileged and everything is available to us, and we're eating ourselves up in the process. It's not an accident that the regimes that are known to be autocratic, Bolsonaro in Brazil, China, Xi Jinping's China, even our own government, are also notorious polluters and climate deniers. Why? Why is it so? It's a consequence of arrogance, of their arrogance, a sense that we can do anything. Right? It's ours. As Abraham said to Avimelech, Ein yirat Elohim b'makom hazeh. I feared to allow you to know who Sarah really is because I know there's no human decency in this place. Do we live in a world today that lacks sort of a common understanding of human decency, at least in terms of governments, maybe even in terms of human relationships? So the Exodus story is presented as a program for Israel. Israel is the dragon slayer. We, as a people, have to take on the ancient empires in Mesopotamia, that Abraham leaves Mesopotamia, and Egypt, most importantly, the greatest civilization of its time. And the plagues represent the battle of monotheism against paganism. That's our task, to take down the gods and to establish the one invisible, unknown God, to defeat the gods of Egypt. Listen to Pharaoh, because he gives it away in our Midrashic understanding. He says, Li Ori, the Nile is mine. Va'ani asitini, I made the Nile. Ki ani hu adon ha'olam. I'm the master of the world. Va'ani barati atzmi, and I created myself. Right, that's the height of hubris. I created myself, ve'et Nilus, and the Nile. At that moment, his advisors came in. They said, and he turns to them and he says, who's this God that Moses and Aaron are talking? Me, Hashem, that I should listen to him. I don't know this God. I checked out my books. He's not listed. He's not among the gods. That's exactly right. Because God can't be listed. God can't be controlled. God is not given to human characteristics in the way in which the Pharaoh understood the God. Pharaoh is presented as a God denier. And the plagues in Egypt are seen as directly taking on the Egyptian gods, whether it's blood that takes on the Nile, right, most important source of life in Egypt, or it's even let's say boils. I have a chart here that lists all the gods and their analog and their connection to the plagues, right? Locusts attacks Seth, the protector of crops. Darkness attacks Ra, Re, Aten, Atum, or Horus. They're all sun gods. And the death of the firstborn is directly interposed against Pharaoh or Osiris, the giver of life. Kasuto recognizes a hint in the Bible to this understanding. When Pharaoh gives voice in response to Moses and Aaron, when he says, Ki ra'ah in 10:10, Ki ra'ah neged penechem, that ra'ah, evil, stands up against you. So Kasuto interprets this as follows: De'u, no, Ki koach ha'el shali, the power of my God, Ra, ra'ah, Ra, Hashemesh, the sun god, Yakum negdechem, will stand up against you. Why? I'm in control. I control nature, and therefore I control you. This is the argument. The arrogance of power produces a type of leadership that says, I know the secret of the universe. Pharaoh stands above the Nile. Therefore, humans are all beholden to that source of power. That's what the leader, the ruler, tries to convince the people of, that they are in control. As a result, then I gain the right and the ability to control your lives and get you to do whatever I need to be done. So Pharaoh enslaves and Pharaoh destroys, while the God of Israel is invisible. The God of Israel teaches that no human being has absolute control over other human beings. There are no human masters. We need to reject, tear down, counteract every human who attempts to control other human beings and who denies their image of God in which they were created, their freedom. So the war is to undo the gods of Egypt, to undo nature worship as the ruling framework for the universe that can be magically, with the Khartoumim, the magicians, controlled by a pharaonic ruler who then uses this ability to also demand anything from nature and from the humans under his rule. On a deeper level, I've always been fond of the teaching of Tzioni Zevet, who teaches us that there is a link in the Bible set between the plague narrative and the creation chapter. That really resolves a lot of problems in terms of understanding what's going on here. It's not about real plagues per se. It's the story in the text, symbolically, of undoing, of how Pharaoh undid creation, turned life into death, creation into chaos, order into chaos, undermined the order of the universe. So that you have, light into darkness, the Nile into blood, the plague, Makat Bechorot, the death of the firstborn, death, life into death, on a symbolic level. Linguistically, what the text does is it links the plague narrative with creation in numerous examples, including one that I want to quote from Genesis, from the creation story. Yishritzu hamayim sheretz nefesh chaya, let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures. God tells Moses and Aaron that the plague of frogs is coming. Vesharatz hayaor tzefardeim, the Nile shall swarm with frogs. Sheretz. So textually, the passages are linked, and then are linked, and homiletically, the lesson. The Mishnah teaches us, Ba'asara ma'amarot nivra ha'olam. The world was created by 10 statements, Vayomer Elohim, and God said, through God's speech, the world came into being. And God brought 10 plagues onto Egypt. Those are the 10 plagues that symbolize the undoing of creation, the reversal of creation, the turning of the world, of Pharaoh's world, upside down. Pharaoh's policies, enslaving his people, reversing the Tselem Elohim of every human being, his policies are linked to an environmental catastrophe. This was articulated by Rav Kook, by Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cohen Cook, the first chief rabbi of Palestine, in a work called Orot HaKodesh, The Lights of Holiness, in the third volume, where he says as follows. I'll translate just one line. Torah Yisrael Miva'eret. The Torah of Israel explains, I mean, it's a doctrine of our Torah. Ech Kiyum Ha'olam, how the sustenance of, the maintenance of the world, V'hamusar ha'enoshi, and human morality, Heim Tluyim Zeh Bazeh. Right? It's not outrageous when we pray daily the second paragraph of the Shema, and it says, right, that if we do the mitzvot, then nature will cooperate, and if we violate the mitzvot, then there won't be any rain. So the connection being made there on a symbolic level, which we need to maintain and understand, is that our behavior, the order with which we conduct the life, has our own lives, and in which we govern and rule, has implications for the order of the universe. And that abuse in one realm, right, produces or is linked to abuse in the other realm. So Rav Kook understood that there's a deep level at which moral responsibility and the natural world are somehow are connected. Now, this was already anticipated by Yosef Ibn Kaspi, a 14th century rationalist philosopher from Arjan, who taught that all of nature is interconnected, all of creation. And he says as follows. It's fascinating. The Torah inculcates in us a sense of our modesty and lowliness, that we should be cognizant of the fact that we are the same stuff as the ass and the mule, the cabbage and the pomegranate, and even the lifeless stone. Now, we in California know that even stones are not lifeless, that there's a life force in the rock itself, right? We and the vegetables, he says, like the cabbage and the lettuce, are brothers. Amazing. It's a radical statement. Sharing one Father. All of nature is responsible for itself, right? We are responsible for the natural world around us, like we are responsible for other human beings. The operative phrase in Ibn Kaspi, as with Rav Kook in his writings, is modesty and lowliness. We live in a world where there is a distinct absence of modesty and humility. And to Václav Havel, in a speech that I was privileged to hear in 1991 on campus at UCLA, where he said as follows. Václav Havel was then the prime minister, the new president of the Czech Republic, of the newly established Czech Republic. He was a playwright, a humanist, a moral personality, right, who had a soul, and who led his government with a vision for humanity and for his people, for sure. And he writes as follows. The communist rulers of Czechoslovakia operated according to the all-or-nothing principle of après nous le déluge. Hoping that no one would notice, they secured absolute power by bribing the entire population with money stolen from future generations. Miners extracting low-quality brown coal from strip mines, coal that was then burned without filters, were grateful for the chance to buy VCRs and exhausted after a day's work, eyes glued to the screen, that failed to notice the pus flowing from the eyes of their children. Their wives noticed. Après nous le déluge is the principle of a person who is related to no order, but to that of his own benefit. It's about greed. It's the nihilistic principle of a person who has forgotten he is but a part of the world and not its owner. Of a person who feels no relation to eternity and styles himself master of space and time. a pharaoh, the owner, the master. I believe, said Havel, that the devastation of the environment brought about by the communist regime is a warning to all contemporary civilization. I believe you should read the message coming from our part of the world as an appeal against all those who despise the mystery of being, whether they be cynical businessmen with only the interests of their corporations at heart or left-wing saviors high on cheap ideological utopias. Both lack something I would call a metaphysical anchor, that is, a humble respect for the whole of creation and a consciousness of our obligation to it. How's that for a world leader? A humble respect for the world of creation and a consciousness of our obligation to it. Were I to encapsulate the experience in one sentence, I would formulate it as follows. If parents believe in God, said Havel, their children will not need to wear gas masks to school, and their children's eyes will be free of pus. To believe in God, as far as Havel is concerned, is to develop a sense of humility. Yirat Elohim. Yirat Elohim, literally fear of God, but really human decency that results from the sense and from an understanding that we are not the masters of all, that we don't control the world around us, that we're not in control of our fellow human beings, that have no right to assert such control. The communists, according to Havel, had no ecological sensibility, no regard for the environment and its resources. Concomitantly, they had no regard for individual human life. The goal was to maximize profits, industrial productivity at all costs. In the process, by the way, they transformed Poland from Europe's breadbasket into Europe's basket case, and they polluted the Czech environment to the detriment and illness of thousands. The abuse of resources went hand in hand with the abuse of human beings. It involved total indifference to the natural ecosystem that relied upon rational, moral policies reflecting human respect for nature and governmental respect for human beings. Unfortunately, the communists behaved like the pharaohs of old. They had absolute control, and they deployed their arrogance, the arrogance of power. Humility was nowhere. And we see this same behavior in our lives today. It's not an accident that the virus originated and emanated from communist China, where rulers have time after time demonstrated no respect for the individual, for the individual lives of their citizens, and no regard for natural resources. It's all about economic growth and the China miracle. Materialism. No humility here. Rather total control. And no limits on use and abuse. Whether it's the consumption of every species of wildlife, including those that are carriers of unknown viral strains, or the disastrous damming of China's main waterway. The most egregious violation of all was that Chinese officials chose not to warn the world, to suppress the initial news of the virus because they didn't want to look bad. They didn't want to hurt their trade, their profit, their power. Human well-being was secondary. My great worry is that this sense that China didn't care because there's no place for caring in their governmental world. My great worry is that this is seeping into our own democratic tradition here, and that the total lack of humility and governmental arrogance somehow is manifest in our own country of we the people. How often have we heard recently, I'm in control, we're the greatest? Contrast this with the way that our humble leaders who established this country spoke, Washington or Lincoln, for example. How sad it is that the same consideration that was operative in China, the fear of appearing to look bad, was echoed in our own country, in our own precincts. Saving face has become the main principle. Our values have been distorted, and our system has been corrupted, because the main driving force in our society has become an idolatrous pursuit of more. What we need, desperately need today, is a dose, a big dose, an injection of humility, if we can speak of that, a reboot, to reorient our culture, the culture of greed, into a culture of enough. I mean, can we hold on to that? Can, in addition to the fact that we pursue, in addition to the pursuit of herd immunity, we see as a goal the achievement of herd humility and decency. Only in that way will we be on the road to establish the Abrahamic community of Yirat, where there is Yirat Elohim, where there is human decency, because that's the key to our continued survival.